Welcome to the Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is a special behind the shot edition where I take a look at one of my photographs and how I made it. Today, I wanted to take a look at a photograph called Blue Jay in Late Snow. As you normally do with the Behind the Shot podcast, please click on the link in the show notes and it will take you to my Flickr page where you can follow along as I go through how I made the image. Okay, so what we have here is a common subject. And when someone uses the word common, frankly, it bothers me a little bit. What is common? Common is common to whom, right? To you? To me? What about someone from Africa? What about someone from Hawaii? Is the blue jay common? Absolutely not. It's not a common bird to them. And so it's very subjective. So I don't like the term common. But it is common in this area of the United States. So because of that, how do you make a photograph appeal to a larger audience? How do you take something that is, quote, common and make it uncommon? Well, the way you do that is you find something unique about its setting or something that it's doing, an action, a gesture. In this case, I have a blue jay perched on a pine tree in snow. And snow is not that common. Yes, it happens in the wintertime, but it's not something that's happening every day. And it's not something that you'd see all the time in photographs. And so we have that going for us right away. So in this photograph, we have the blue jay perched on a pine tree. Now, anyone that knows me knows I'm always looking for different or unique perches for the birds to land on. In this case, hey, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. This is the top of my Christmas tree. Okay, this is actually probably a Douglas fir, which arguably may or may not have a blue jay on top of it. Maybe not the best choice here, but I thought that at the time it was the best idea that I had. And you learn to kind of make do with what you have and try to make something unique out of it. So the opportunity came along. We were expecting a snowstorm out of nowhere. I knew I had the Christmas tree. We were getting rid of it for the year. I simply cut the top off the Christmas tree, and it gave me a perch, a very sturdy perch also for my blue jays. So that's the first thing I did. The second thing I did was I realized that I wanted to be out in the actual snowfall itself. It's very important, I think, that you try to get the photograph done while it's actually snowing. I mean, yes, you can photograph them actually perched on top of the snow or on a snow-laden branch and so forth, but I really like to try to get a picture of the snow falling. So it's got that going for it. The other thing that it has going for it is the bird is actually perched on top on this very thin branch. And that gives us kind of this sense of presence, I think. It gives us this sense of balance, that this bird has such amazing balance that it can perch on this tiny top of this branch. So it's got that going for it. It's got that balance, that strange balance going for it. The other thing is that the bird itself is first an interesting species. The blue jay is a beautiful bird. It has very beautiful feathers, a bluish gray, depending on the lighting conditions and so forth. But very, multiple shades of blue. It has a crest. It has this beautiful black ring around its head and near its bill. So it's a very pretty bird. So that's another plus here. You want a pretty subject, right? That's what people want to look at. People want to look at things that are pretty. Maybe it's a fault, but that's the bottom line. So the subject, it helps if you have an attractive subject. The other thing about the bird itself here is that it's actually fluffed out. And this is something that happens in the wintertime. And one of the reasons I love to photograph birds in the winter is because they fluff out their feathers in order to give it's a thermal protection for them. It actually keeps them warmer by doing that. So, but it makes for interesting photographs because they get fluffed out and they're, just cuter that way. I think there's a much more, it's a cute thing that they do, and they all do it. All the birds do that. So it's got that going on. It's a vertical composition. I think vertical looks good when you have a bird perched on a vertical perch. So in other words, a tree trunk or the top of a tree or, any kind of branch that's extending vertically. Really, it looks best in a vertical composition. This is a true vertical composition. This is not a crop. This is actually me turning the camera vertically and photographing. I know that's unheard of these days with the high megapixel cameras. But, yep, it's a true, I meant to do this. It was purposeful. One of the things I don't like about this image, let's talk about that. If you look carefully, you'll see that the shutter speed is high enough. Now, let's look at the shutter speed here. I've got a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second, and that's a little fast for snow falling slowly. Now, if it was a really fast snowfall, 125th, somewhere around there, you'd probably get some blur. But because it's very slowly and methodically falling, then you get kind of frozen snow. And some people don't like it. I'm on the fence about it myself. I think it looks good. Would it be better if it was streaked? Maybe. But the other thing you have to understand is that streaks, sometimes you can't tell it's snow, because the other thing that streaks in your photographs is rain, right? So you would need some kind of sense of that it's snowing besides the streaks. So if you included, for example, you might want to include a snow-covered branch in the scene that has the streaks. Now that makes sense, because now we have that visual comparison. And we can say, oh, it's clearly snow because there's snow on the branch. But in this case, we don't have snow on the branch. The birds have knocked the snow all off because when they fly in, their wings flap, and that blows the snow off. So we don't really know that it's snow. But because the snow is frozen in this case, when I mean frozen, I mean frozen in the image, we have no problem identifying this as snow. And we can see it clearly on the bird itself. It has snow falling on its beak and so on and so forth. So I think that's actually good in this case. I think it doesn't hurt the photograph. I think it actually makes sense here. The reason the background is so gray is because that's snow. That's actually snow in the background on all those trees, and it's giving it this grayish white bokeh, if you will. And so that's perfectly normal and common. That's what you would see in a snow scene. So that's okay. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, and this is interesting, is if you'll look on the bird, particularly underneath the bird, the snow on the ground and up along the tree is actually filling in the shadows. And the bird has this very... the lighting is such in a snowstorm, first of all, that you have a lot of diffused lighting. And then combine that with the fact that the lighting is hitting the snow, or the sun is hitting the snow, now you've got reflectors. And so it gives you this really soft, warm feeling image, even though it's freezing cold out. So I think it's got that going for it. The specs of this image, I shot it with my Canon EOS 1D Mark III, my 150 to 600 millimeter contemporary, Sigma contemporary lens. I shot it at f6.3, 275 millimeters, 1/200th of a second at ISO 250. The other thing you'll notice here is I use a little shorter focal length. And the reason for that is that because it's a large bird, jays are particularly large birds, I can back off and get a wider composition, and I don't have to worry about as much camera shake and so forth, because I'm down to, 2/50th of a second or less. So just throwing that out there for you, because that's an important concept when you're photographing birds. The other thing it does is it actually gives me a little more depth of field. Because I'm only using 250 millimeters, it gives me a lot more depth of field. And that can be good when you're photographing birds, to see that the whole bird is in focus. Yet the background is still blurred. So I think it was mission successful on this photograph. I wanted to show it. I'm fairly proud of this image. I mean, it's not a big prize winner or anything, but it's a nice photograph, and I think I would be pleased to have this hanging on my wall. Just one more thing I needed to say before we leave is just thanks, guys. Just thanks for hanging with me. All you folks that have stayed with this podcast over the last year and a half, thank you. Really, sincerely, thank you. It's been kind of a labor of love for me. We're coming up on, before you know it, we're going to be at 50 episodes, and I just really appreciate it, and hopefully many more to come. So keep getting the word out, and just a big thank you. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.